Okay, let's get started. So, as you've heard throughout the day, there's lots of benefits and confusion around labeling and certifications and that sort of thing. So, the purpose of this panel discussion is, can we be authentic without labeling? And also the importance of collecting data. So, we have with us today 3 really skilled people to begin to answer that question. Because in today's marketplace, there are so many stories and claims being made, and it's resulting in a lot of consumer confusion. And with consumer confusion, that limits the amount of product that genuine producers can move through the marketplace. So it's important for us to start addressing this issue. So we have with us today Anna Claussen, and Anna's with the Other Half Processing. And I do have to say, Anna and the Other Half Processing, you guys were really instrumental in helping put the potential of dealing with byproduct marketing on our radar and working together. So great thanks to the Other Half Processing and your colleagues, as well as you, for reaching out to us and working so well with us on these big issues. So thank you. So Anna is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Growing the Grass Project. And you've all heard us mention grass today, and so we'll get a much better explanation as to what is grass. And it is part of a USDA Climate Smart Commodities Project. And so Anna will be talking about that. And then she will be followed by Christian Meny, who's with Montana Audubon. And Christian has 10 years experience running a statewide bird monitoring program for USDA, BLM, and World Wildlife Fund and their Sustainable Ranching Initiative. And he is now the Director of Conservation for Montana Audubon. And so Christian really enjoys being out fishing and walking with his dog and playing his guitar and playing with his kids and also learning the banjo. So he could share some of that. And then, of course, our own Chris Mehus, who currently is the program director for WSC, but as the first of the year will take the helm as the executive director for our organization. And so Chris has been working with ranchers for his entire career in lots of different ways. And he has been instrumental in moving our regenerative ranching efforts forward and has a great deal of experience and opinions about this very topic. And so without further ado, Anna.
Thank you, Lil. I'm definitely going to pass those accolades for Other Half Processing on to my colleagues and ask for your grace too. I'm new to working with Other Half Processing. Some of you, I'll give the background of where Other Half Processing meets up with grass, meets up with growing grass. And some of you probably heard Jim Kleinschmidt speak last year at this event. So I'm really excited to be here for this conversation, specifically around labeling and certification and validation. A little bit about me and maybe why this excites me. I come to you all from Minnesota. And while I'm new to the Other Half Processing team and this work, I come from hospice nurses and ER nurses, caretakers, who are very tight-lipped, patient listeners. I come from a Minnesota farm. I come from cattle halters and blue ribbons and the 4-H's and shearing sheep. I come from the farm crisis, from community suicides, from family conflict, from mourning and guilt. And so coming from that space, coming from the farm, I've spent many hours sitting in cafes, sitting on the armchair of in tractor cabs, listening. And maybe some of you can relate. Coming out of the farm crisis, I was also one of those who said, go off and find a job. You know, there's not going to possibly be something here for you on the farm. And I did. So I also come to you 20 years, a Minneapolis urbanite. I got a degree as a landscape architect, was really drawn to this ecological visioning of our landscapes and how can we create regenerative landscapes that are better for the people. But it wasn't too long after I was in urban planning and in that field and in a field that I loved that I pretty much stopped in my tracks and said, I have this privilege that very few people have, particularly as I was feeling so much tension around producers and consumers and so much judgment and lack of deep understanding of everything it takes to bring a product to market and the risks that are really in place. So I left that track and I went and worked for a nonprofit, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Eventually then forming my own consulting, Voices for Rural Resilience. But all of that related to this topic was this drive to seek connection across urban and rural, particularly producers and consumers, in a way that really helps us see each other's realities, see how we have greater in common and what our shared humanity is. So I'm excited to come to this conversation and this work through that lens and this topic of can we be authentic without certification or labeling? I hope to kind of have that conversation, but also reframe it and say, how can our certification and our labeling be more authentic? How can it be about connection as much as it is about education? And when I look at all of you as producers and ranchers, I think about that as how can we keep you all doing what motivates you to get up in the morning and remove what keeps you up at night and support you to feel seen and valued and heard. And because I hear you all, the certification gets a lot of paperwork, but I think sometimes it can almost be demoralizing to have to constantly prove that you are doing what you're doing. So I'm going to go through this quick, and I'm excited for the conversation more than anything, but a little background about growing grass. So the Growing Grass Project is really about getting more use and value out of meat processing byproducts from regeneratively raised beef, bison, and buffalo. So this is working with the full supply chain to market. And this started with other half processing. 5-6 years ago, Mark and Jim Kleinschmidt, brothers from Nebraska Farm, are really the programmatic lead with other half processing for the Growing Grass Grant. And this was just for them doing this work of meeting with processors, meeting with producers. In 2021, they collected 25,000 hides, returning the profit from this byproduct value to the producers. So they're working with hides, organs, other offal that we've talked about here for pharmaceuticals, or particular strong interest in leather is where it started out with companies like Timberland and others. And then grass. I know we're throwing another acronym at you, and I apologize for that. This is what evolved here as what we have for the Generalized Regenerative Agricultural Sourcing Specification. And I appreciate being brought up this morning. It's sometimes complicated to try to have something that isn't exactly straightforward. We're not saying it's one certification, it's one validation framework, but this is meant to fill that gap in the market that we saw where there is a high demand from supply. And so we're looking at this being an equivalency verification approach. And so what that looks like, as I mentioned, other half processing in partnership with Timberland and Pure Strategies really were the group that started this traceability in claims. We had support from Applegate and VF Foundation, and those of us sitting in the room really looking at existing certifications, grass-fed, American grass-fed Audubon, regenerative, organic certified, and others, and really seeking for a tool that allows farmers and ranchers to use these existing certifications and audits to meet the criteria for biodiversity, animal protection, animal welfare, and others that the market was asking for. So really, just to reiterate, we did not want to create another certification. We were looking for ways that we could lift up those and we could put them under this equivalency umbrella approach. And then just as that was really getting its feet, we decided we needed to pause because USDA came out with their Climate Smart Commodity Grants. So while OHP had already been working with lots of producers and lots of tanneries and processors, this was an opportunity to expand what was happening across the country. And the opportunity here was seeking to expand that market opportunity from all angles. So making buying and certifying more flexible and inclusive, gaining greater access to value-added regenerative marketplace, and then validating that climate and economic value, quantified, traced, and demonstrated. So that is what this project is here. It is a 5-year, $35 billion project with many partners, some of you in the room, that is allowing us to really look at every piece of that supply chain and test it and turn it around and try to advance them simultaneously so that we can aim to expand and de-risk. Even in the last conversation in this room with Todd, really speaking a lot, I liked about de-risking and where do we have the opportunity with this grant and with producers in particular and the supply side to help you de-risk as we try to grow this market. I'll go through this pretty quick, but just this sort of question of why. Why growing grass? Why was this initiated? We really feel like we needed to figure out all the pieces. We also feel like if this was easy, it would already be done. You'd be getting a higher value for your byproducts. And so we're looking at where is the need? Is it on the supply side? We know there's a lot of producers producing, but we also know that it's not all matched up with what the buyers want. Is it in the processing? Is it in part being able to fill that demand for traceability and segregation in that process? And also, is it on the brand? Is it on the consumer side? Where do we need to engage with consumers? Some would say educate. Where do we need to engage with them and brands and build that market so that you're all not also putting a supply forth that doesn't have end users? And we love to recognize in this space, in many cases, there's definitely a focus and a value in community base. Bumbleroot and you all in this room are a prime example, and WSC of building that market within the state. So we're just gonna move through this quick because there's lots of animation. But on the supply side, we're looking at where can we help support regenerative ranchers and producers to get certifications that they might not have or to fall underneath these claims. Where are there producers who haven't yet considered growing regeneratively? And also where are we expanding those that are in production? As I mentioned, as we're looking with processors, we have parts of this grant also to support filling in those gaps and testing what's missing. And this is, as we've talked about much today, I don't think I have to talk about, it's every part of the other half outside of your meat opportunities. Certainly we've started with many of our brands interested in leather, but pet foods, pharmaceuticals, so on and so forth. And then where's the brands? Where are the climate smart goods? We've talked about it here. We'll talk about further. Where is it certifications and consumer demand that is driving it? Where are we talking about government and other climate entities looking for data? And how do we tie this all back in? And then a bigger part of this that allows us over 5 years is what are the feedback loops so that we can be simultaneously testing this, supporting this, and learning as we go and not pushing on one part of the puzzle and waiting for the other to catch up, so to speak. So all of this here is to keep really the climate smart value intact and carried all the way to the end. Who's involved? A lot of partners in this, which is what we're grateful for. It's also part of what brings us to new challenges, the more partners you have in the room. But as I mentioned, Other Half Processing is the programmatic partner, but this is led by the American Sustainable Business Institute and so many other partners, some of them up here on this screen and others not. But this is going to include producers, aggregators, processors, field researchers, certifiers, those that are on the measuring, monitoring, and verification end, economists. We have end market industry leaders, retail business, coalition builders, and then even the data informatics experts, which I'm still eager to understand what they do in this process and translate it for us all. And what does that mean for all of you here in this room? One of the biggest areas of focus is on growing supply. We want to work with farmers and ranchers. We want to determine what and how it's best to bring ranches in to grow that supply. And so in order to do that $35 million grant, half of that is going back to producers and ranchers in multiple forms. One of them is being able to pay you for your research. And this isn't research for research's sake. It's really just being able to pay you for the time that we are working with you to get the feedback loops, to understand what's working, to understand what's not working. potentially to cost share for you if it is a certification program or an audit that you're looking to get, that we could cost share for part of that program, or on-farm inspection, or actually even back up further and help get through the weeds and have you understand which certification might be best for your ranch if you're looking at them. And as well as market incentives. We think there's so much opportunity here that we're also looking with different ways to have subsidies and programs that'll support that. Also worth noting that we have a focus on working with underserved farmers and ranchers under the USDA definition for sure, but 25% of our funding wants to go to farmers and ranchers who are dedicated to underserved or have that access. So as that little plug in the end before we get into a good conversation, bottom line is if this is something that you're interested in, we want to hear from you. We're still working through what that criteria is going to be. Jim would love to have been here today himself too, actually in DC at the first USDA kickoff meeting for the grants. And we're waiting to get just a few more answers so we're not coming to you multiple times, hopefully, and changing what we hear the criteria are. So the best way to do that is to go to our website here or find at our booth or find Sarah too and go through some of their short survey that will give us just your contact information. So when we're ready and we know what it is to be enrolled in this program, we can reach out to you. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thanks a lot to WSC for having me and putting this conference on. It's really great. My name's Christian Meny. I'm the Director of Conservation at Montana Audubon. And the question here is, are you authentic without certification, verification? And the answer is, of course you're authentic without that. My background is in research and wildlife monitoring, and I did that for 10 plus years in Montana. And as fun and interesting as that was, I was collecting data across the state, looking at the distribution of species, mostly birds, but other mammals as well. And that was a great profession, but what I really wanted to do is do some tangible on the ground work. And I started working on ranches, doing bird surveys and bird monitoring, and I loved working with producers and meeting them, and that just started to become one of my favorite things. And so I moved on into what we are now is Audubon Conservation Ranching. Let's see, do I have slides here? Oh, sorry, jumping the gun. So in a nutshell, there's the certification part of Audubon Conservation Ranching, which is a National Audubon Society initiative to stabilize declining grassland bird species. At Montana Audubon, we're a state entity, and we facilitate this program. And in a holistic sense, in a broader sense, we try to support ranchers so that they can continue to steward the land and support wildlife, ecological productivity, and strong rural economics. And so the certification in SEAL is just a tool. It's a tool in the toolkit. But we've talked about it a lot today. It's under the grass umbrella, and Todd Churchill talked about Blue Nest beef and Thousand Hills. And so this program, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how it works. And I'll just kind of quickly run through the nuts and bolts of it. But it's a Western-wide program, and that's because the last best grassland is in the West. Spanning all the way to California and the Rocky Mountains. The impetus, the reason why this initiative exists is to try to stabilize declining grassland birds. Out of all the different suites of birds, grassland birds have seen precipitous declines more than any other group. Over 50% decline in 50 years. The good news in Montana is we have some of the last best habitat for grassland birds. And these species listed on the left here represent what we can find, as particularly in eastern and central Montana. So we work with producers who are the best land stewards in the country. And we try to support them so that they can continue to support this habitat. And the Audubon seal and certification is, like I said, just a tool to let a producer, to enable them to tell their story, to distinguish their good work on the landscape. And hopefully it empowers consumers to be able to promote land stewardship through their purchases. The path is fairly simple. It generally takes about 6 months, and you could talk to Peter and I if you're interested. There's a few tenets. Tends to be grass-finished beef, no sub-therapeutic antibiotics, no further conversion of grassland to farmland, trying to keep grassland in grassland. We develop a habitat management plan, which usually takes about 3 months, and that allows producers to outline goals and objectives for their land. And then there's a third-party auditor with Food Alliance, and that leads to certification. Beyond that, our staff at Montana Audubon do high-level bird monitoring over the next few years and collect data on habitat, and then we inventory the birds on your land and see how it changes in response to the management. So I'll bust through these. So some of the benefits is it's relatively inexpensive right now. Audubon's able to pay for the certification at this time. We provide some marketing and market development through partners like WSE and Arrow. There's a habitat management plan for each ranch. Often that allows us to find out what ranchers need, and then we often are able to write grants for infrastructure projects like stockwater pipelines and native reseeding, fencing, and things like that. There's bird monitoring and inventory, so that data collection. You need data collection when you write a management plan for birds and bird habitat to see how the birds respond, to test the efficacy of your management. And then workshops and technical development. And so we've seen particularly since the pandemic, when there was a bit of a crisis in food production, that there is a demand for more local, more grass-fed, more verified products, I would think, access to it. And this is not my expertise for sure, but I think 1 in 3 is specifically looking for claims-based labels and things like that. So we've been talking a lot about this today. One thing, a few benefits of the Audubon seal is has really strong name recognition. A lot of people know Audubon. We can provide some marketing assistance, and as well as some market development. And we've talked a lot about some of these groups like and grass and things like that. And I just kind of wanted to show you some of our regional and online market, direct to market partners, as well as the national subscribers that actually Todd was involved in, Thousand Hills and Blue Nest Beef. Yep, we got that. And that's the gist of Audubon certification. Okay, thank you.
I think I'll just take that out instead of trying to lean over and speak into it. So yeah, thank you guys for kind of leading this panel off. I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, I think. I've been Western Sustainability Exchange going, completing my 6th year now. My passion is in ranching, in practices on the ground. I've spent a lot of time working with ranchers, developing better grazing management plans, working on maps, different practices, looking at different rotations to really improve grazing management. The term regenerative has been thrown around a lot today, and I hope that instead of confusing you, it's becoming more clear. Really, in our mind, as a rancher, it's developing a sense of reciprocity for the land or giving back. So it's really about making sure that ranching is not seen as an extractive industry. I think in a lot of the films that you see now that really sensationalize this topic, Kiss the Ground being one, they're really trying to point fingers and build a story around what isn't regenerative. And I think that it's good for the public to know that. But I think demonizing things and creating that emotion can sometimes be a really negative thing. And we can all do regenerative to the extent that we can do it. And so, again, going back to the comment that I made earlier, I really believe that ranchers are the original environmentalists. They're out there every day caring for the land. To steal a quote from Roger Inderland that's on our website, there's not a rancher alive that ever set out to damage the environment. We're doing the best with what we have, with our resources, with our knowledge, and we're learning more all the time. So I think as we improve that, we'll be able to be better stewards of the land. But in order to get paid for it, we need to find ways to turn that into information and then translate that information into a language that consumers can really understand, and then hopefully use their dollars to reward that. And so going back to the first panel, I tried to pressure that panel into giving me an answer about what do consumers want. As a company, what are you trying to communicate to your consumers? What is it that resonates with them that can allow you to demand more for a bag of dog treats over some competitor? It seems like we've kind of beat around that bush all day today, and I don't think we know the answer to that, and that answer is going to be constantly changing and evolving. So that's a really tough thing. And so that gets down to claims, that gets down to messaging and how we brand ourselves and how we communicate to our audience, all of which we've talked about today. The one thing that we haven't talked much about is what we can do in terms of gathering data. And so that's what I'm going to really try to impress upon you with what we've been working on for the last couple of years specifically. So we've talked a lot about certifications, okay? And the alphabet soup that everyone's been talking about. Certifications are good. They help to specify practices. So that kind of gets that checking the boxes, right? So looking at all the things that a consumer might be concerned about, those items, those headings, those focus areas are all contained within our certification processes. A problem with certifications is that they are dependent on auditors and subjective judgment. So, basically what a certification is designed to do is create thresholds, minimum thresholds. If you don't meet that threshold, then you can't participate in the certification. Well, in order to meet that threshold, you are audited on a regular basis. I'm actually an auditor for the grass-fed program, and it's a process for every ranch. And every time I go out to do a certification, it's a different conversation, it's a different process. Working through all those things is really complicated. And it's based somewhat on my subjective judgment and the relationship that I create with the ranch when I'm out there. The other good thing is that once you've differentiated all those topics, those areas that are included in your certification, then you can brand that and communicate it to the consumer. And so the opportunity that I want to speak to you about is really to be able to generate data on the ranch to help augment and supplement these certifications. So we have the opportunity to directly represent actual management, and we can represent that as change over time. This will allow us to differentiate amongst ranches rather than just having a blanket certification where everybody qualifies for the same objectives. We can actually measure metrics out there on the ground that allows a ranch to say, hey, we're reaching this level of management over our competitors. The problem with it is that, currently most of those things are going to be self-reported, but there are ways to improve that. So we've heard a lot today about the different entities that are gathering types of data. So I just listed some up here. I don't want to go through all of those, but basically you can see that there are a lot of entities out there, some of them ranch-oriented, some of them by NGOs, some of them by government and academia. And they're all systems to try to gather data. most of this data fits into an ecological context. So we're going out there and measuring things in the environment that we can see change over time. So whether it's in the rangeland or the plant community, whether it's in soils, whether we're measuring wildlife species or keystone species, whatever those things are, water, riparian areas, all those things are things in the environment that we can measure change in over time. The dilemma is, again, back to that question of what's relevant, what do the consumers care about, and how do we present that data? So we started a couple years ago developing a tool to, first of all, help ranchers manage their operations better. So really get to the questions that they need to answer about how do I improve my grazing management, and how do I measure that change over time? How do I show my progress? So the question is, we've talked about all these things that the consumer might be interested in, and I really want to get to the question of, does anyone care about what's happening at the ranch? Like, what are you doing on your own operation? What can we measure there to show what your progress and your changes over time? And so this really applies to grazing management, and that's kind of my passion, my area of expertise. And so we, 3 years ago, started developing this grazing management software. So it's a map-based software. It's a subscription-oriented type of application that allows ranchers to, first of all, really get a good idea of how they can manage their grazing systems better. And so from a mapping standpoint, we get a good representation of how the pastures all lay out, how big are they, what is each one's carrying capacity, and what things can we do to improve infrastructure. So where can we install water? How can we distribute that around the landscape? What strategies can we use to move livestock around more frequently, with the ultimate goal of creating longer and higher quality rest periods? And it's really, we talk so much about the grazing systems and the improvements that we can make, but it's really about providing that quality rest so that the grasses can recover, they can be more vibrant, then they can contribute, they can sequester more, they can pull more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, they create more biomass, that biomass creates more life in the soil, that's the carbon that we can trade, and that also results in better habitat and better opportunities for birds and other species to become more vibrant. So by doing this, there are several, a few at least, applications online that Maya Grazing is one, Pasture Map is another one, that have been created by technology experts, engineers in software. Not many of those, I don't think, have consulted with the ranching community. And so they're very difficult to use. The learning curve is really challenging. And there's a lot of people in this room that have used those software programs. Not many of them are still using them today. Or, Bill, they hire young people that are their apprentices to do it for them. So, so anyway, we set out to try to create one that's really by ranchers for ranchers, that may not do all of the number crunching and generate all the data that some of those software engineer-led efforts did, but can really still get the same result in the end, better grazing management, allow us to measure change over time, which those other softwares don't do. And then the other thing is to incorporate some of this ecological data right in there, right in that same software tool, so that we can see changes in ecology over time and then map those or compare those with changes in our management. So I'll end there and we can get into more of the discussion. We're in the beta testing stages for that software right now. Lil is not at her wit's end with me, but it's been a process for a nonprofit to create a software product. It's not our expertise, but it is our passion. So we're to the point now where it's functional. We've got several ranches that are helping to advise us and have been along with us since the very beginning. And we're hoping after the first of the year to be able to really start onboarding more ranches, gathering more data, again, with the intent of empowering better decision-making with the kind of data that we can collect, and then trying to translate that data to the consumer. So with that, I'll close and we can get to questions. Thank you. I'll give you that one.
Yeah, this is for Chris on the Audubon certification. So, yeah, here. So one of your things is grass-fed. And so in the previous, well, like, you know, looking at your map of that prime bird habitat in Montana, if you overlaid that with what's appropriate for grass-finished beef, that would not line up. And so, you know, I guess my question would be like, what do you mean? So, you know, I could supply a calf or a yearling to a grass-fed, you know, it's not practical for me to have a finished grass-fed animal, but I could be part of that chain, or, you know, what I market, and it may, wherever it goes, a feedlot or wherever, it's grass-fed on my ranch. So I guess maybe if you could clarify what that means.
Yeah, it's kind of so we certify the land as bird-friendly certified. So the animals coming off it should be grass-fed. If you were going to use the certification label on your product, then that product would need to be grass finished.
You could still qualify for the program but not label the product. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing is, you know, one thing on grassland in the winter, you pretty much need a protein supplement. And so, you know, we're always looking for the cheapest protein supplement possible. And it, you know, it might be distiller's grain or something like that.
Right.
Would that disqualify you from the program?
In our protocol, there is something where it says in winter conditions, in conditions where you need to supplement, that it is allowable to use some kind of grain. But it's just ideally, you know, you're feeding your animals grass as much as you can throughout the year. Yeah, thanks.
I want to follow up on that, Chris. I saw the bullet that said grass finished only.
Could you repeat that?
I would think that takes 80% of the ranches in your zone in Montana off the list. Why would you do that?
That is a bit of a crux for the program, as you know, most operations in Montana are cow-calf. I think the idea is that we are sort of reducing the use of finishing cattle in industrial feedlots, and so I think that appeals to the consumers of bird-friendly products. And so I think that's the motivation behind
Well, isn't that a giant leap for you to presume to know what they think? If I'm raising turkeys on my ranch, I can be very bird friendly.
Yeah. Well, sure. What we're trying to do is decline the loss of grassland native grassland songbirds.
Well, I don't want to be argumentative. The outline of your program precludes me from being part of your program.
Right. I know it is an issue, and I'm sorry that's the case.
Well, I love birds too, and I'd be happy to do it, but I can't say that my cattle are going to be grass finished.
Right. Well, I think. Right. If your land met all the standards, the criteria of our protocol, what we certify is the land itself and not the cattle. And so you could be Audubon bird friendly certified. It's just that you couldn't use the label on your products your beef products if they were going to a corn finish or grain
So my
finish.
cattle do go to a corn finish, and they're exported to Europe, and Europe would love to see Audubon, but you have forbade me from using your label when I ship it to Europe.
Right. It wasn't solely, I'm sort of the middleman in this. It wasn't solely my choice, but I have to practice what the standards call for.
I can maybe offer a little bit of context. So Audubon certifies ranching practices. So I have a buyer that's interested in the data that comes with that and doesn't care that they can't put Audubon on the label. They will pay me a premium to source cattle from Audubon certified ranches. In this case, it's trim. So it's all going to be cull cows. In that case, your certification benefits you because I've got a buyer that values the Audubon certification, even though they can't put it on the label. If you recall, I had a slide up there that had the market wants two things. It wants third-party verifiable attributes that allow an on-product label. In order to get that, you need to be Audubon plus grass finished. Plus, the second thing the market is starting to ask for, and this is Anna's whole project, is climate data that can be traced directly back to the product. And that is what this particular buyer finds very appealing about what Audubon's doing. So if I can source them 1,200 cull cows a year that are all raised on Audubon ranches, and I can provide the data that shows which ranch they came from, and we have some, initially it's going to be very limited, but over time it will increase in quantity and quality, some ecological data that shows that compared to their former sourcing practices, they have reduced their carbon intensity by 30%. Even though that never goes on the label, that has great value to them. And so Audubon is sorting their way through. They have two very different requests from the marketplace. One is to be able to put that seal on a package. And current thinking is that in order to do that, they want all the Audubon conservation ranching standards plus some kind of grass finishing. Now, they came to that conclusion because that's what we did for Blue Nest. But there's a whole nother group, a whole nother market that's coming to Audubon because this pilot project I'm doing, that customer came to Audubon first, and Audubon said, Standard Soil is our logistics partner. If they'll put together the supply chain for you. So the answer is it's complicated and it depends, but there is absolutely value for you to be Audubon certified, even if you are not producing grass finished beef, and even if you can't offer that label to your European customer to put on the package. What we're going to be able to do for you is provide climate data that can go to that European buyer, and they can use that in their annual climate report to show how they're improving their sourcing, and that improvement is documented by a lower carbon intensity score. Did I make it any more clear, or did I make it more complicated?
Okay, Kim. We have about 8,000 acres south of Billings on Lodgegrass Creek. And we have worked with Christian and Audubon people for several years, and also the World Wildlife people. And I just want to reinforce what Todd's saying, and that is we haven't sold an ounce of beef with the Audubon Conservation Ranch label on it, but we have gained so much from the data that are being collected, for being able to let our customers know that our land is bird friendly, by being able to get a hold of funding to expand our fencing and our pipelines and all this kind of stuff. It's a holistic package. It's not a question of sticking the beef care label on your beef. It's a question of the giant impact that you can make on your ranch and receive on your ranch from the data, the information, the relationships, those kinds of things. So I'm just like Joe Schmo rancher here, but the Audubon program and the World Wildlife Program are practical programs that have really, really helped our ranch a lot. So I don't think Christian did a very good salesman job here, and clearly Todd's an order of magnitude better salesman, but it's a very good program and you should really, really consider it. It's been awesome. And I would say the same thing about the RSVP program. Can't say enough good about them. That was my comment. And no, I haven't talked to him beforehand to work this out.
So I guess about 5 or 6 years ago, regenerative started to become a big word, and we farm and ranch in eastern Montana, and it was finally something that our ranch could buy into because we farm and we ranch. And it was like we could never be grass-fed because we're grazing crop aftermath, and we're not organic, but regenerative through the practices, we've been able to lessen our fertilizer, and we have 20 years of soil samples, so we know what we're doing with our organic matter. And through, part of this conference, it's been grass-fed, 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 and then sort of tag regenerative on top of that, because it seems like right now, regenerative is the big key word. And regenerative doesn't have a label. Matter of fact, when I went to label my beef, because I feel I'm regenerative, I went to B&L Scales to get a label, and they said, oh, you're going to put regenerative on your label? You're going to USDA. So then I talked to the lady at USDA, and she goes, well, we can't put regenerative on because it's the new buzzword. I said, well, then where's the regenerative classification? Well, there isn't one. So you don't have a standard for regenerative, but you still can't call yourself regenerative, but yet everybody wants to tag along with regenerative. So, and I know WSC is doing some, and so is Gabe Brown in that group of trying to figure out where regenerative is, but there's a lot of producers that are regenerative that aren't just grass-fed. And I think that's what the gentleman was saying is, there's a lot of regenerative agriculture out there, and regenerative agriculture is underneath the soil to begin with, not really on the production side, the commodity that we're selling. So I think everybody just needs to keep that in mind too, that this regenerative thing is going to probably be 4 or 5 years out, and hopefully it doesn't get polluted from where it started. But I'm feeling that it's getting that way. I'm feeling organic is getting threatened by regenerative, and grass-fed is getting threatened by regenerative because it is the new climate smart production out there. So I guess that was just a comment more than a question, but I think Audubon, you guys, well, all those lists that were right there, it seemed to be sort of a singular purpose, but collaboratively is where the regenerative will come. And it just will be time, so.
Yeah, and I'd like to respond to that, just to say that that was part of the reason that we set up this panel, was to talk about, this is our opportunity to help define that and to help drive that conversation and to drive the information that goes on the label and how that's communicated to the customers. And so part of the point I was trying to make is that we can collect data ourselves as ranchers, as NGOs that support ranchers. And that data really comes in two forms. It's either data from the ecosystem. So we're measuring soil health, we're measuring bird populations, we're measuring water quality, we're measuring habitat, things like that. But it can also be data that we're collecting about our practices. So whether it's farming, how many acres did you have under no-till 10 years ago versus how many do you have today? And from a grazing standpoint and the software we're trying to develop, what was your move frequency 10 years ago, and what is it today? And what was the length of your rest period? How do you vary your season of use? What is your stock density? All those principles that we know drive better management and improve ecosystem processes and are truly regenerative, we can measure those on a ranch by ranch basis, and that can be represented to the consumer. Now, I've presented that to a lot of branded beef and lamb and other products, friends of mine, and they give me a really quizzical look like, okay, well, that's great. I'm going to gather all that data, but what does the consumer care about that? They don't know. They don't understand any of that. Well, the reason they don't understand it is because we've never tried to explain it. We've never tried to articulate it. We've never tried to put that on a package or as part of our story or whatever that might be. So I don't have an answer, and we really didn't set up this conference to give you answers. It's all to stimulate good conversation and hopefully to create relationships and momentum so that we can help answer these questions going into the future. But just to summarize it, I think there's a lot of data that each of you can collect on your ranches that can be empowered through software products like this that can be communicated directly to the consumers eventually. We've got some work to do, and it'll take some time to get there, but I think that's a big, big opportunity.
Chris, can I just add to that? So my name is Chris Smallwood, and I'm here with ESMC. And one opportunity available for folks doing regenerative ag is in ecosystem services markets. And this gives an opportunity to add income to farmers who pursue these practice changes and lead to improved outcomes. And so this approach is not a labeling strategy. And I understand regen is it traces back to the 1980s with the Rodale Institute, but it's in terms of like trending, it's like you said, a 5-year-old word. And there's 100 other words. There's sustainable agriculture, and there's climate smart agriculture. And, all of these things are a little bit hairy, but I think from my standpoint and where an ecosystem services market comes into play here is not as a label that you stick onto something, but as an income opportunity to put forward these practices that will lead to a essentially improved soil health, improved water quality, and improve your farm resilience over time. And these are sold to corporate partners who then include that in their reporting and narrative stories. And so I just want to tie this into the conversation that just because you're not doing grass-fed doesn't mean that there's not opportunities for you. So I'll add that and pass it back.
Well, since I can't get into the Audubon program, I'm going to try the next one. I do appreciate the comments from the lady from Lodge Grass or Lodge Creek. That was informative. Anna, you had a bullet on one of your graphs, and it was talking about the non-conversion of grassland. And from time to time, we will take grassland out of production to put in cover crops, because the cover crops help us in our rotation when we have something to go to in the fall, when the grass is all gone, and that helps us keep the burden and pressure off of the other rotating pastures. And it's nice to come back to that cover crop. Plus, we believe that we have soil benefits that come from it as well. My question is, that bullet says I can't convert any grassland, that would disqualify me from your program. Can you speak to that?
Thank you. I will try to. It must be late in the day. I'm failing if that bullet was specific to Audubon. That's probably me. Oh, poor Chris. Not going to throw Chris under. And gentlemen right here, your comment too about how broad we can get with regenerative. To try to answer your question, I think we're really excited with grass, with this opportunity, with the 5-year runway and all the partners to actually be exploring where some of these other alternatives that we do know fall under regenerative versus grass-fed, cover crops, and finishing, and ensuring that through the many different ways you could certify that you're true to that certification. And we are turning it over and questioning, what does this mean? You know, there's certification and labeling, and this isn't, Todd said, did I get clear or more complicated? I think it was yes, and it's like, I almost want to start with an apology that this isn't a panel up here where we're going to have answers. It's that it's almost getting more complicated because there are these different ways that there is value added. And I think when it comes to data and when we're looking at regenerative, we should be able to pull all that data through different formats. Certifications are some of it, but that's looking at best management practices. We're looking at trying to measure. And so we do want to look at saying, can we measure what that impact is on climate when you are rotating out for cover crops versus grass-fed? That isn't, I don't have the answer as to which under our umbrella and sort of the validation, if that might be an option. But I think what we're looking at here is to not have to shift any of the current certifications to try to meet that, because they have very specific different goals. And for us, for grass, we're talking about byproducts. It has different needs and necessities when we're talking about your meat market. So we also don't want to dilute any of those labels, any of the meaning behind that. But it gives us an opportunity to test some of that and to check the data and be able to come back and say, here's where we're finding that we are still improving soil health and we're still meeting what you come out to say is regenerative and giving back to the soil and improving. I wish I had a clear-cut answer, and I didn't mean to throw Chris under the bus with the Audubon, but I think it's really worth exploring.
Yeah, and I think, again, just maybe to expand on that and what I tried to say before is I think venues like this, gatherings where we can talk about these things and really help to drive that conversation is what's going to get us to an end point where we really are rewarding people for the practices that are caring for the environment. Because we've kind of had two conversations today. One is where we started out with the first panel. What are companies hearing from the consumers, and what do the consumers want? What are they willing to pay more for? That doesn't consider really what is happening on the ranch or answering any of your questions. So I think we have to answer that question, or the companies have to help us answer that question. And then we need to be talking to the producers that are using progressive practices, regenerative, sustainable, all the things that we know are creating a healthier environment out there. And then it's our job to measure those things and come up with ways that data, that information can be put into whatever it is, whatever certification it is that will help the companies then go and sell that for more money. So again, it's not a great answer, but more discussion, more conversation. It's getting late in the day.
So this has been really cool the whole day, listening to all these different programs. And my question to the organizers of the conference and also the panelists is that I've seen 3 or 4 programs already this morning that could add value to my ranch, to make it more resilient, to make it more profitable. Yet I need to choose, and I want to scale. I'm more interested in working with a bunch of ranchers creating these common attributes versus just trying to do it myself. And so when I think of like this rangeland monitoring group we work with, and Chris, you talking about your program, Sonny, you talking about your program, gee, I could get paid for doing research. Well, that's exactly what we want to do with the rangeland monitoring group. And then Ann with grass, yeah, who would want to be part of that? And Todd with your financial program, and then trying to figure out who's the most profitable. I want to use them all. But so my challenge to what we're doing here is like, how do we as ranchers, I really don't want to pick and choose here because everything I've heard has great value. But somehow all these different programs need to explore, like, don't compete for me because I want to be part of that, I want to be part of that, I want to be part of that. So how are we going to be creative to leverage all this expertise that really does rise, that the tide rises for everybody and all the ranchers become more resilient, they become more profitable, people are getting better food. But I think it's a really challenge here because you can get really confused here. I mean, we work with 5 or 6 different partners on our ranch, all wonderful, cool stuff and bringing resources. And so how do you get all those people to agree on what actually healthy is? And I think everyone knows they're being challenged by this, but I think we're at a point where we should start trying to bring some of this home into some alignment. But maybe not this conference, but I think we need to be heading towards some alignment here.
Well, I'll start to answer that, and then you guys can do a better job. I think, to me, it's kind of like, I'll just equate it to changing over your grazing system. Like, you can't do the whole thing the first year. You can't do the whole thing in the first 5 years. So I think you've got to pick areas that are convenient and where you can see some measurable change quickly and you can get some traction. So I think it's the same with these programs. I think you need to listen and learn and then go to your operation and look at what fits, what resonates with you, what is closest to the values and qualities that you want to promote and that you can achieve, and start somewhere where you can get some quick success. And then, it's really incumbent on all of us to be communicating to make it easy for you, because you're right, it's really confusing and we're throwing a lot of stuff at you. But I think if there's something so from an organization standpoint, putting this conference together, the purpose of it is to introduce you to all these different opportunities. And I think you got to pick a place to start. Pick an organization or a tool or an opportunity that makes sense to you and something that really, really hits your passion, and start there and get some success, and then try to expand beyond that. But I don't really feel like they're all that exclusive either. I think all of them are pretty well intertwined. But anyway, that's not a great answer, that's what I felt hearing your question.
I'll just pick up a little bit. I think that's great advice. I think for those of us who aren't on the ground, who aren't producers and ranchers, it's the obligation on us. It's in the middle. How do we help optimize this for you? That's what excites me about the growing grass opportunity. Grass as a validation, a whole system of multiple certifications excites me. But the opportunity to work over 5 years with multiple partners is to try to optimize that for producers and ranchers. You start somewhere and we can come in and tell you what layers well with that, what's compatible with that. We can get feedback from you all if you're partnered in this work of what works for you, and to not generalize it, but there's certainly things that are going to work better in Montana than they are in Missouri. And what can we learn from that? And where is it best for us to help you de-risk? At what point of the process? Is it working with you? Is it working with the aggregators that you work with? Is it working with the processors? So those feedback loops that I talked about are very exciting for me, but only in the way that we can feed that back to you. And also, step in and help remove that. Another group excites me in the growing grass work is the informatics that I mentioned, and groups that just take data and information like this, and you say, get creative. Like they're not just creative, but they can visualize it for others. You could follow a mind map of seeing, like, here's these, sort of like when you were a kid and you had those books where you could choose your own adventure and which route is it going. I think there are so many opportunities that we need to take advantage of, particularly when we're combining, as Chris said, there's consumer demand and labeling, and then there's data and climate forward outcomes and indicators for companies. We're only complicating it more there. So any way that we can come and bring compatibility. And then the last thing I'll say is, I'm speaking about one of the climate smart commodity projects. I know there's some conversation about this tomorrow, but if you want to talk about overwhelm, Minnesota has 40 some, you all have 20 some, I think. Right now, I hope that the same can happen for all those who are receiving these grant funds, that we have good communication, and we're finding that other grantees are coming to us saying, we actually would love to partner with you on X, Y, or Z. And those, I think that will be important. For us being in the byproduct space, we want to know from USDA if as farmers and ranchers, you can be part of another program that's helping you put fences in the ground. And we're helping you get access to your byproducts market if they're not competitive, if they're compatible, so that we can make it easier for you all. But start somewhere and then hope that we can all play our part and make it better.
Yeah, I'll just say, we all in the end sort of somewhat have the same end goal of healthy ecosystems, forage productivity, strong economics. And I think that there's some examples here of grass, having a plethora of choices with certification. There's a few examples of research and monitoring coming together. World Wildlife Fund and Audubon have been able to team up on some of our bird monitoring, and our bird monitoring goes into a national program as well. So there's some integration there, which we're always looking to do. And then I resonate, with Chris, pick something that works for you. In our own program, like I said, the certification is actually just a tool, and I try to think of it more holistically in a broad way. How can I support a rancher so that they can support our goals, which is wildlife habitat? And so we're able to do that. The certification is just a gateway drug to some of the other support that we can provide through grants, helping with fencing or water infrastructure and things like that. So we try to make it a little bit more flexible as far as we're not just certifying, we want to just support ranchers. So that's all I have to say.
WSC does have a tool, it's our Regenerative Ranch Guide. So that is designed to, as a survey, to ask a series of questions in the 8 different, mostly agreed upon focus areas of what constitutes regenerative or sustainable or whatever term you want. But there's 8 focus areas that there's most agreement on. And that gives an opportunity for a producer to answer a series of questions in those 8 areas and to figure out a starting point. Where is your operation in those different 8 categories? It also is a way to bring your team together, whether it's your other family members or whether it's other people that help you on the operation. See if you agree on where the ranch is in these protocol areas. And then you choose, if you want, where you want to move forward. And if you want to move forward in soil health, then looking at a certification that supports more of that. Or if you want to deal with changing your livestock into a grass-fed program, then you know how to move forward, and the certification like bird friendly may be a place for you in that way. And that might be one tool to help you sort through what, first of all, constitutes regenerative, that's mostly agreed on, and then where you are and where you want to go, and then which certification standard would work best for that first foray or the next journey that you take. So I just offer that as something that we do offer for people who are interested. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I'm Dave Scott. My wife and I sell lamb on a small scale. And there's one data that we haven't mentioned, I don't think too much about yet, and that's the bionutrient density meter data. And my question is, where do you see that data, if it ever comes online, incorporated into your programs? Because essentially, that makes all these programs a backstory in terms of the consumer when he or she is determining what to buy at the supermarket.
Well, it's good to see you, Dave. And that was covered at least vaguely in some of the earlier conversations. My understanding is that we're pretty early stage understanding-wise, development-wise with the research and what metrics it is that we're going to measure to target nutrient density, what things it is that make certain foods healthier for us. So I think that's going to come, and I agree that it's going to be very significant once we get there. So I can't give you a really good answer to your question other than, kind of back to what we're trying to do. I'll just answer it from my own perspective. Whether it's nutrient density or soil health or any other metric that you're measuring external to the ranch or external to the management practices, if you can't articulate what your change has been, what effort you've put in, and how you've improved your management, then it's pretty hard to say that you can take credit for increases in any of those metrics. So I think it's really important that we look at our management, we look at a baseline, we look at our starting point, whatever that is, and we monitor and measure those things over time so that when the question comes, well, great, your nutrient density went up X grams or whatever that is, then you can attribute that back to your actual management change. If you don't have any records of that, then that could be due to genetics, that could be due to all kinds of different things. So I maybe didn't answer your question directly, but I don't know. I think we're still learning a lot about nutrient density.
Okay, we have a question from online. Terrell, you want to? Who's got a mic? Oh. Here's.
Okay. This question is from online. For the panel, what's your take on the word grass and whether or not it's become a counterproductive word for buyers and shoppers? Because it's about whole systems, good management, and that's what the good meat consumer is looking for. They've been conditioned first to look for grass finished, but it's not about the feed, it's about whole systems management and figuring out how to help producers market that. What so many producers are doing, whether or not they are finishing animals with grass, some are finishing with 75% forages and 25% locally available grain.
I'll start. It sounds like one of those, there's just a theme here. It's complicated. But I do think the terminology can really get diluted. And even just an acknowledgement here, I mean, we're talking about growing grass as an acronym now really plays into what does that mean? We're talking about regenerative versus are we talking about grass? I'm curious in this way, almost not, I know it was Mr. and Mrs. online, so we can't necessarily put it back to them, but those of us in the room of where do we intersect terminology with our stories? We haven't talked too much here on this panel of how you all feel about how you get your story of what you're doing on the ground to the consumer. And I'll let the panelists also answer about that sort of what does it mean when we're using terms that can be really generalized. But to me, I'm wondering where you all feel like you want to be the owner of your story that can contextualize it. Or if that's really also not something you want to be having to also put on your plate.
Yeah, I guess my response to the question would be that we hope that we're getting to a point where these things become more clear. And to Bill's question, where your operation and the gentleman in the back, where your operation fits into this whole complicated mess of different possibilities. So I think we're trying to understand what the consumers want. So again, it gets back to this company side of what claims do they want to make and who is their target customer and how can they market whatever it is that they are marketing directly to that person and make them feel compelled to want to spend more and reward good management and stewardship. And then, what is it on the ground that we all know contributes to a healthier ecosystem that we can actually do within each one of our contexts to be a part of one of these programs. So I feel like the aim of grass this certification umbrella is to kind of lay the landscape and allow you to participate in an umbrella of different programs where you might, before this, you would have had to pick one of those to be a part of. I think this creates a little bit better opportunity and diversification of those, so you can still demonstrate what you're doing, but maybe not have to fit one of those in particular. But it's complicated, again, back to what Anna said, and I think we're trying to improve things, but it's really hard because we don't know what the consumer wants exactly, and that's changing all the time. And all of our situations on each one of our operations is changing. So we just have a lot more work to do, I think.
I think grass is a great term. I think we live in grasslands. That's what range is on. Grass is an expression of soil health. Herbivores like cattle and bison eat grass. And so we're assuming that good grass indicates good land management and good land stewardship. And so I'm just throwing it out there, but I think it's a fine term, although it may just be the term of the day.
Do we have time for one more question? Comment? Yep.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Anna Claussen with World Wildlife Fund. Thanks for the pitch, Mickey. That wasn't planned, by the way. It's a little bit of a riff on the last question, but I'm just curious if we're seeing demand, really obvious demand for grass on the label. We're also seeing it for a sense of place on the label. Where did this come from? And I'm just curious, open-ended, not suggesting there's a right answer, but how you see either your certification scheme or the ones you work with embedding that sense of place into the product.
This excites me. Not because I have an answer for it, but it excites me. I think, grass as a term is something that's visual. That's why people are drawn to it, I think, but it can also not have as meaning if we all think of it differently. But a sense of place. I'm intrigued by consumers' ability to scan a barcode and to have, Bill, I'll pick on you because I remember your name, but have, Bill's story pop up. And it's not me telling your story, it's you telling your story. And so that there is less loss in translation and we get a sense connected to our producer of what your sense of place is to the land. What's your relationship to grass and to raising animals on grass or regeneratively? I get really intrigued by sense of place because I think as producer and consumers, it's one of the places where people want to have a connection and identity to where their food comes from. And we continue, the further away we get, the more I think labels we want to throw on things. And I think we're overwhelmed. I don't know how many people even as processors up here and say, I don't even look at all those labels because, it doesn't have that human connection. And so sense of place to me is a great place, great place to start, but how can we make it easy? And how can we make it your sense of place communicated to the consumer, communicated to the companies? And the labels are there to back that up, but that's not what's going to be memorable to people.